thrill. Things could be otherwise. There could be the big bomb after all. I mean, it's joked about. It should be, in a way. It's one way to express this very despair. It's joked about. The more frightening movies, as I say, are movies like Blade Runner, where a very near future is presented in which you, like all other commodities, will be recycled. Where that is the greater danger, not to die a death in despair, but to live a life that's not human. The real danger is one that was summarized beautifully by a theologian friend of mine at Duke. The old problem of theology, which has always been closely connected to philosophy, as you may know, the old problem was the unbeliever, the non-believer. The new problem is the non-person. This Kierkegaard had already had a foretaste of. It isn't the problem of people not believing, it's the problem of finding people. Are there people? Do we want to call these beings that are walking around people? And that can't, and I don't want to make this sound elitist, that can't be said from a standpoint separate from you being one of them. You know, raised in the same televised culture, where the simulated images of the real are just as real, sometimes more real than real. I mean, it is not a problem about which one can be an elitist in any sense, because it is quite generally a social malady, in much the way that the massive support for the war now could be understood as a social malady of a certain kind, like shell shock, the reaction of people struggling to be sane in insane conditions. Despair, the reaction of people struggling to be human in inhuman conditions. But the answer to this is not to, all the psychologists can do, if you go to them, I mean, it's not all, it's a pretty good thing. If you don't want to worry about this kind of thing, despair, losing your humanity, there are drugs. And I'm not talking now about the just say no kind. Those are, as we know, for the lower classes. There are middle-class drugs that can be prescribed to you legally that, as it were, handle these existential worries. Valium's one. In Don DeLillo's novel, Dialar is an even better version. It totally kills the fear of death. Just pop one pill and just shuts off the electrochemical things that make you despair, fear death, have anxiety. Valium already, I think, is, well, it's been replaced, though, by a whole series now, right, of designer tranquilizers. I mean, it's still the major general one, but now they're designer tranquilizers. Well, there's a point here, a very deep one. We've been tracing throughout here a series of human projects, and yet we have not yet faced the greatest danger. That if the story of the development of society in the 19th century in its broadest sense was the replacement of manual labor by machine labor in the advancing countries of the world, the story of the 20th century will surely be in part and in broad strokes the replacement of intellectual labor, thinking, and even feeling and emoting by machine labor. How much of that has already occurred? I'm not up here to spin a science fiction story for you. Well, we already have near future movies that project cyborgs and stuff, but we also have actually technically built virtual reality suits. We have hosts of designer drugs. We have TV and movie stars that redesign their bodies, that redesign their iconic images, that come out with a different kind of soul. For example, Michael Jackson. We couldn't decide whether he was Diana Ross. At one time he kind of looked like Diana Ross, one of the young Jacksons, a Motown singer, or a Walt Disney star, because he is re-whittled, reshaped. Now, in terms of this whole discourse we've had about what humans are and their values as they develop historically, probably the greatest danger in the final situation that might be faced is what's left of the human at all under modern conditions. What is left to talk about in this dimension. And in that situation, you have to face squarely this problem that Kierkegaard, I have to say with some nostalgia, called despair, because it's just as common today to find people who are giddy over the current situation. I mean, really, they write books called The Ecstasy of Communication, about how wonderful it is to be an image rather than a person. Let me try to make this, get back to a West Texas level with this so you can follow me. For Reagan, it was so much more convenient to be an image than a person. Real person like him's kind of a drag, semi-good actor. Semi-good. He was good in that one movie where they cut off his legs. Made him shorter, for one thing. Magnificent as an icon. Great TV icon, which was his function. You know, and I know, that he couldn't run a government. That's not debatable. Just like a cabbage can't drive a BMW. We don't debate issues like that. What was important about him was his iconic significance. It was more real than real. See, FDR was a real president. Real. FDR's all these sort of embodied things about him. He's wheelchaired and tied down, sort of the feel of the real about him. With Reagan, his telematic image was sort of more real than even real. It sort of transcends even our notions of limited reality because, well, the famous Hollywood phrase, larger than life. That's what we say about screen figures. He was larger than life, by which I suppose we mean he was dead. And in a sense, it was totally irrelevant, because as long as the images kept flowing and some other hack actor could dress up like him to show up and wave under the noise of the helicopters, it mattered not. In a society, and this is the point I'm making, in a society where images count to that extent, what it means to be a subject, what it means to try to find a project, gets to be re-understood in terms of what it means to find the right place to buy the clothes, the best place to go to school, the right kind of accent to use, and who to get to know. It becomes a matter of fashion. For Kierkegaard, that was rather despairing. He thought that humans driven to such an extent, driven to that extent of socialization, hyper-socialization, would greatly prefer death, but would be pretty much unable to pull the thing off. Just like the young man in Heathers doesn't quite get around to blowing up the high school, and the young audience is very disappointed that he doesn't. Everyone that I talked to who saw the film, all the young people went, well, it would have been so much better if he'd have blown it up. I mean, we did want a Woodstock for the 90s. It would have been real. It would have been, send a message to the whole country. Well, this is where we reach, as it were, a sort of limit on what we can do in terms of either social theory or human values, and that's where we begin to discuss the possible disappearance of the subject of that discourse, the human. And if human beings were constituted in what they physically did and what they thought, which seemed to be what we were talking about for most of the course, right? Then if in the 19th century we began to replace physical labor with machine labor, and now every home has a PC that's smarter than any of us used to be, and mental labor becomes replaced, what functions are left over for humans to perform becomes really problematic. It becomes really problematic. Now, the despairing way to look at it is that we've become useless. However, that's only in the scale of values I've been criticizing. In other words, we would become useless in the sense that they don't need our labor. That's the scale of value I've been criticizing. And I think part of the giddiness of this situation within which the need for humans to do certain things is becoming erased in society through the advance